hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Poveglia.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 192, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, my friend, it is a historic day in England. How does it find you?
It has me nervous and looking forward to the polls closing shortly and seeing how long I can manage to stay up. will be after we finish recording. Obviously, I'll see how long I can go, either before my brain or the champagne runs out.
Sounds like a good challenge to me. The liquor stores here are going on strike today, so I didn't get an opportunity to go pick anything up beforehand. So you will have to enjoy champagne for me.
What do you mean they've gone on strike? What's going on?
It's a very long story. I won't get into it. But
is this to stop Americans coming over the border and getting cheaper beer?
One of the few things that we do not have over the Americans. That's right, America. I said it. Their alcohol is much, much cheaper. When I was down in Indiana a couple weeks ago, I bought myself a lovely bottle of mezcal, and I think it was, I paid about $40, $45 Canadian, and that same bottle is about $70 here. And then I dropped it in the parking lot, so that was fun.
How much is a bottle of champagne in Canada?
I couldn't tell you. I never buy it.
Why not?
I have so little to sell. No, I'm just cheap. I was going to say I have so little to celebrate. That's not true. I have a great life. I'm just cheap. But yeah, so it is a momentous day for the English people. It's an election, folks, in case you haven't, pardon, for the British people. It's an election, if you hadn't figured that out already. But we are not here to talk about those things. There is, in fact, another, probably more relevant, or definitely more relevant, milestone that we just passed, Paul. You were telling me this off air. Yesterday was 15 years since the death of John Keel, paranormal researcher extraordinaire.
It's incredible, really. I know, like we were saying, it's one of those things. I think John seems to have been one of those people that was probably born about 10 years too early for the internet to catch up with him, I think. Because how he's viewed now compared to how he was viewed when he passed away, and the reach of social media at that point, back in 2009. Obviously, John passed away 15 years ago, and sometimes when you think about it, it just seems so far away. It's one of those weird things, because I think the last sort of 10 or 15 years, he'd kind of got so fed up with American ufology, because he hated being labelled a ufologist. He was a Fortean.
Sure.
And obviously, since his writings, a lot of us would consider ourselves to be Forteans and Keelians, amongst other things. And I think it's only now really that his influence and his reputation has really reached far wider an audience than I think he ever could have imagined, even for a forward-thinking gentleman such as himself.
Yeah, I mean, John Keel was a huge influence on my paranormal education when I first started researching strange. And of all the people I've read since then, and of course, I read quite a few books at the time, fewer over the years, still a lot of articles, a lot of things like this. And I still think he's one of the most trustworthy voices in that field. Do I think sometimes maybe he was a little too credulous? Probably. I think the fact, he believed Gray Barker is not a great indication of his ability to discern truth from fiction all the time. But I still think he was educated and disciplined in a way that I think researchers now are mostly not. There are exceptions, of course. You and I have talked about a lot of wonderful, talented people on this show who do carry Keel's tradition forward, and I have nothing but admiration for them. But I think there is so much more laziness, and there's people who don't have the basis in history that I think you need to have. You can't be a paranormal researcher, or really, I think, any kind of expert, if you don't know the history of the field you're in, because you're just going to keep reinventing the wheel, thinking you're the first one. Yes.
And you end up falling into some of the traps I was speaking about with Charles Lear on my most recent episode, when we dived into the batshit world of 1980s ufology and all that stuff, which is, we barely scratched the surface of some of the things in his book. talking about 4 characters who were middle level in regards to their influence at that period. But, they created shockwaves, and obviously we've still got a couple of them wandering around.
And so Paul actually sent me a link to this massive PDF file, which is a collection of all of John Keel's newsletters, or at least a huge number of them. I believe the document, the pages number in the hundreds, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it covers 7 years from 69 to 76.
Yes. And so contained in that document are, again, it's a massive treasure trove of Fortean phenomena, folks. I will try to remember to post a link to the article in the show notes. It comes from an interview. You can find the link to the PDF there. But within that PDF, we found a number of really cool stories set around Italy. And so what we thought we would do is on this episode, we're going to be exploring stories of haunting from Italy, primarily haunting. We have, I believe, 6 stories, but in one of those happy little coincidences, those little moments of synchronicity that sometimes we get on this show, I also happened to see that the journalist Brian Baker, who's a friend of the show, posted this really great YouTube video which breaks down the history of the Venetian island of Poveglia, which has a lot of bullshit floating out there about it. And we actually covered Poveglia way back on episode 13. So I thought on this episode we will explore stories of haunting from Italy, plus we will help dispel some of the myths around the Isle of Poveglia and explore some Keelian stories of UFO encounters from Italy, which you will likely not have heard anywhere else. They're not new, but they are newly surfaced, we'll say. And so that is the show we have for you today. But before we get there, we got to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And on this episode, I'm probably going to be using a ham-bone Italian accent a whole lot. So that's what you're enabling, for better or worse. And of course, we'd like to thank all our patrons, Apple Podcast and YouTube subscribers. But right now, we're especially going to thank the latest ones. They are
Abby Allen,
Mackenzie Weeb,
Tracy Williamson,
Nazir Masumi,
Aurora R,
Jennifer Rooks,
CT.
Guys, again, thank you so much. This show is a blessing, I think, for both of us. We love doing what we do, and you allow that to take place. So thank you very, very much. Ad revenue is very, very unreliable, we'll say. That's unreliable is generous. So patrons and Apple Podcast and YouTube subscribers, you guys are the engine that drives this great machine. And while we'll wait till the end of the show to tell you about all the cool stuff those subscribers get, we will say they get an ad-free feed. And who doesn't want that? Ads suck. If you want to join our sweet community, you can head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. You can also sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. One last thing, shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and composer Harper Smith. You can find more of Harper's work at rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts wherever you stream your tunes. All right, now I'm going to practice saying mozzarella a whole bunch.
And I'll be saying Roberto Baggio quite a lot.
Bene.
Dotto Scalacci.
Bene. Yeah, this is what we've got waiting for you, folks.
You see, I'm going to be all right here. Such is my love of both Italy and Italian footballers' names.
We are on firm ground going forward. Really, though, we have some great stories and to go with the ham-bone accents. We promise. And we'll be right back with those. Our first story is called Wailing. I was in Venice this time last year, and I still can't get my head around how and why this happened. I was there for 3 nights. It was my first time in Venice, and I loved it. I was there with friends, but due to our poor planning, all 4 of us stayed in different hotels. I chose one near the station, which has an intimate hotel run by a religious family. It was a classic old Venetian villa facing a canal, and the place had a chapel, a garden, and was full of religious merchandise and decorations throughout. My room was on the second floor. You had to climb 3 sets of stairs, and on the top you were met with a marble square lobby with a round table in the middle. There were few rooms around this lobby, and the rest of the rooms continued on 2 corridors that stretched on either side. My room was one of the ones attached to the lobby, a single room that looked over the canal. It was a simple, small room composed of a single bed with a cross above the head, a basin, and a wardrobe. It was a cheap and cheerful hotel, and I slept like a baby the first 2 nights. However, on my 3rd and final night, I had trouble getting to sleep, and the loud neighbor, who was watching videos, didn't help. I had to bang on their wall around 1 a.m., after which they stopped, and I fell asleep. But I remember feeling uneasy and agitated that night. I woke up sometime between 3:30 and 4:30, which wasn't unusual for me, as I don't sleep well. That's when I heard a group of loud, wailing people in the building. It echoed into my room via the hall. At this point, I remember thinking that the source of this noise was either coming from the stairs or the bottom of it. I was initially annoyed, thinking they were a bunch of drunkards who came in after a night out. Then it suddenly hit me that the hotel had a 12 a.m. curfew. It was unlikely a group of people suddenly came out of their rooms to cause a commotion. I came to my senses, which made me even more aware of this mysterious wailing. It was loud, almost in despair, and crescendoed over and over, echoing into the lobby. I came to my senses, which made me even more aware of this mysterious wailing. It was loud, almost in despair, and crescendoed over and over, echoing into the lobby. I came to my senses and realized that this was definitely not human. It's hard to explain, but something in me knew this was not alive in one form or another, and humans could not make this noise. I have never, ever felt like this before. When the wailing finally stopped, I was relieved, but what happened next is something I will never forget. The sound resumed from the foot of my bed. This thing, or these things, waiting in my room, at the foot of my bed, very much present, closer, and louder. I don't know what happened after that. I blacked out or passed out, and when I was conscious, it was around 7 a.m. To my surprise, I didn't feel as scared until later in the day when I tried to recap what on earth had happened. To this day, I can't explain what this is. I wasn't a paranormal enthusiast or believer and believed I would stay like this until proven wrong. I'm actually easily spooked and always thought I'd end up crying or screaming if I encountered a ghost. My theory is that my body just went into extreme fear after that thing came into my room and simply shut down. I think about this pretty often, and I still get chills. So, Paul, before anything, I have apparently a bird right outside my window. I cannot see the goddamn thing. So, folks, if you hear some chirping, it is not cool, sweet ghost noises. It is, in fact, a winged pain in my ass. Hard to be badass when you got Tweety Bird in your ear.
I'm sure Edgar Allan Poe approves.
Someone has to, I suppose. I got to say, Paul, it's kind of interesting. I mean, again, we always associate Banshee lore with Ireland, but obviously this is not Ireland. And I was actually all ready to make a Hosier joke. And when I realized, nope, this is Italy, Bren. This is an Italy show. And so I got nothing. Have you heard of this before?
No, I haven't. And I've been to Venice.
Oh, really?
So I probably walked past where she was staying because I was staying outside of Venice. We went for the day for a trip, and so we got the train in. So I walked from Venice train station all the way down to the big square at the bottom.
Right.
And it was beautiful. It was phenomenal. It was a beautiful spring day. It was like 28 degrees. Fabulous. The locals were telling us it's the best time to come because the canal doesn't smell too much. Or canals. And we just had a lovely wander around. We met a family from South Carolina. We met a family from Sheffield.
Of course.
It was beautiful. We had some rustic pizza down a back alley in a little Italian bistro. A few glasses of vino. It was a wonderful day. And then we almost got on the wrong train home, which would have been fun because we'd have woken up in Vienna.
There are worse places to wake up.
Well, there is, but we weren't staying in Vienna. We were staying in Padua.
I mean, I would still rather wake up in Vienna, but it's expensive, especially if you're not expecting to be there.
Yes, that would have been an interesting conversation.
Oh, man. I've never been to Venice. I was only in Italy once for about a week after Morocco back in 2008 because we were both very sick. But my grandfather used to have a record from this Italian comedian named Pasquale Caputo, or Pat Cooper. And he loved this record. And sometimes on Saturdays we would stay over at their house, and sometimes we would have a fire in the family room, and he had a huge chest record player. And one of his favorite records to play us was this Pat Cooper record. And the thing that always stuck with me was about Venice. Pat Cooper said, Venice, the city of love, they say. We were on the canal and I put my hand in the water. I came up with an eggplant. And he was not happy with the state of Venice. And that's got to be back in the 60s.
I thought it was fab. I really liked it. It was lovely. Love the weather, love the people, love the food. It's some lovely 80s Euro pop bangers from that country as well.
True. This is also true. My most enduring memory of Italy is I think will, and no matter how many times if I end up going, always be going to see The Last Supper. And not because of the artwork, which, fine. It's whatever. It's there. It exists. I'm not going to pretend like it was a transformative experience seeing it in person. But what was brilliant was some jamoke taking a picture and the nuns swooping down on him like Batman. I thought they were going to flay the skin from his bones. Delete that picture. And he deleted that picture. And I think it took about 10 years off his life. They were like dementors. Just black cloaks descending on him.
Like Jawas around an abandoned cyborg.
You are not wrong. Yeah, they put a hex on that boy.
Did you see him again?
I did not, which I think says it all. I'm not saying that the nuns have a super secret underground fight club where they beat the crap out of anyone who dares take a photo of things they're not supposed to, but I'm also not saying they have it.
I'll be disappointed if they didn't have a secret underground fight club in the Vatican, I have to say.
Well, the church is good at secret underground shit. I'll give them that. Anyways, moving away from the many and varied crimes of the Catholic Church, while I was digging through the archives, the Ghost Story Guys archives, because we have that now, folks. We've been doing this long enough. I have archives.
Woo.
I was digging through, because I have scripts. Like, I actually used to write both sides of the conversation. So I've got scripts going back to, I think, like episode 10, something like that, in Google Drive. So I was digging through and I found the script for The Haunted Island of Dr. Killjoy, which is where we talk about Poveglia, and we'll be talking more about Poveglia later. But I actually found a story that I'd forgotten about, which I'll share here briefly before we move on to the next story proper. Yeah, it was a woman named Jo. She worked at a gym I used to go to, and she told me a story about when she was backpacking with a friend in Italy. This would probably be the mid-2000s, thereabouts. And I guess they were staying in a hostel on, she said, an island. She can't remember which. I'm given to understand Italy has more than one. So I don't know exactly where it was. But in the middle of the night, they were both woken up from sleep by a feeling of presence in their room. And again, both women experienced this. And not only that, but they experienced this incredible pressure holding them down. And it lasted for an indeterminate amount of time. They weren't exactly sure, but eventually it passed. And again, they were both wide awake. They both experienced exactly the same thing. And she wasn't really a person given to this kind of thing, but I remember her telling me that this was probably one of the strangest experiences she'd ever had.
Absolutely, said numerous times. I think one of the biggest issues we've got with countries like Italy is that there's a deep, rich history of that. There are ghosts all over Italy, if you can be bothered to look and delve into it. And especially these days, it's a lot easier to translate things on the internet and through Translate, even though it won't give you an exact conversation or conversion, rather, of what's being written. There's certainly great things. And Venice as well also has one of my favourite celebrity ghost stories, which features Joan Collins.
Oh, no kidding.
I think she said it on Celebrity Ghost Stories several years ago, where she'd been invited to a very swanky Hollywood-style party at a palazzo in Venice, where they were all staying over. And they'd had numerous problems through the day and night. Candles kept blowing, drafts kept sort of billowing through, even though it wasn't supposed to be a very windy day. They'd hear funny noises. The electricity kept tripping all the time. But she was awoken in the night to discover she was wandering back to her room, and she came face to face with a ghost wearing her pajamas.
Oh.
Which she's never understood. She said it was strange enough seeing my pajamas, but they were being worn by a woman wandering around. And as soon as I challenged them, I don't remember what happened, and then I was in my room.
That is fascinating. It's almost like a doppelganger or maybe like an out-of-body kind of experience.
Yeah. She said it didn't look like her, but she knew it was a woman, and she was very confused as to why she was wearing her pyjamas. She said they were very nice, grey chiffon pyjamas. So she thought that the ghost had immaculate taste, if nothing else. Black and white. I'm stationed in Italy, and I'm renting a house from an old Italian gentleman. He speaks a jumbled bunch of English, and I can speak some form of Spitalian, which is a mix of Spanish and Italian. We can kind of communicate. When I first met the man, he told me he was only sorry for the junk in his attic, and that was his wife's. I had never gone up into the attic until one night in December, when I thought I'd heard some shuffling. I proceeded to pull down the attic stairs, and armed with a flashlight, I looked to see if something had happened. The attic is divided into 2 rooms about 20 foot by 20 foot each, with a wall separating the 2, and a small doorway that allows access to the further of the 2 rooms. Each of the rooms has 4 1 foot by 1 foot windows with small drapes. There are 2 on the north side of the room and 2 on the south. The same with the other room. I thought maybe one of the windows had not been shut and was allowing a breeze and possibly had blown something around. However, when I checked, they were all tightly shut and locked. And whilst I was up there, I took the chance to snoop through the landlord's junk, as he called it. It was mostly some old clothes, a few antique furniture pieces, an old grandfather clock, and a few children's toys. When I turned around to leave, the light from my flashlight just barely lit up the far corner, and as I was turning, there was a figure. I gasped and about had a heart attack. As I lit the corner up completely with my flashlight, I saw that the figure was one of those body figures that tailors used to hang shirts on, so it fills the shirts out. On the ground to the left of this was some sheets of what I assumed were silk in many different colours. They were stacked up neatly in a sort of pyramid style except for one. This roll of black silk was on the floor directly in front of it, and I told myself this was what must have made the noise. I picked it back up and placed it on the pile and left the attic. Everything was good for another few days until one night I heard the same shuffling noise as before. So once again I took my flashlight and went back to the attic to discover that the black roll of silk had fallen off the pile again. I picked it up, and instead of putting it on top, I placed it upright, leaning against the pile. And so I went back downstairs and returned to cooking my dinner. After I was done eating, I took a shower, but it was cut short due to the fact that my water heater broke mid-shower. I called my landlord, and he said he would be by in the morning to fix it. So, tired, cold and frustrated because my water heater was also part of the house heating system, I went to bed. That lasted about 25 minutes before the shuffling noises happened again. Now I'm becoming angry at this stupid silk pile. As I climbed into the attic, I decided I was going to push the pile over so the rolls wouldn't fall off anymore. As I walked through the doorway and rounded the corner, I froze in my tracks. There were now 2 rolls of silk on the floor directly in front of the tailor's body stand, the black one, and now a white one. They were side by side, perfectly even with each other. I was unsure if this was a coincidence they had simply fallen like this, or what. At this point I wasn't scared, but more intrigued. As I walked closer to pick up the 2 rolls of silk to try and recreate the placement of it, my phone started ringing. I ran back downstairs and answered the phone. It was my landlord. He stated he apologised because he didn't realise how cold it was supposed to get tonight and was going to come right over and fix it so I would have heat. My landlord arrived and had the water heater fixed within 30 minutes. As he walked around the house to check all the radiator heaters on the walls to make sure everything was working properly, he noticed that my attic stairs were down. He asked me if it was all right if he could go up and look to make sure that the roof tiles weren't leaking. I told him that it was his house, and he was more than welcome to check it out. I followed behind him, and he looked around at the ceiling and the floor of the first room to see if there were any wet stains or marks, and proceeded to walk into the second room, and check there too. When he got to the far corner where the silk was, he stopped and asked if I knew what this was. I stated that it was silk, and that the rolls kept falling off the pile. He looked at me and said, "Nope." As I continued to look at him in an awkward way, He asked me if I could walk him back to his house because he had something I had to see. I obliged. When we got to his house, he asked me to sit down while he went to get it. He came back with a photo album binder and a bottle of wine. He poured us each a glass and opened the album. The very first picture was a newspaper article that showed a vehicle collision. As I looked at it and attempted to translate it into my head, he started to tell me what I was looking at. He told me that this accident had killed his wife and daughter. His wife was on her way to drop their daughter off at a school party. I presumed he meant a dance, when a driver ran a stop sign and T-boned their car. He also told me that his wife was a dress and fashion designer, and that she'd made the dress for their daughter. He then showed me something that made me get that feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up. He showed me a picture of his wife making the dress, and she was making it in the attic of the house that they used to live in before she died. My house. As I examined the picture closely, I saw something that I cannot believe I didn't see sooner. That dress was made out of black and white silk. Not only that, but the two silk rolls were lined up perfectly with each other, just like they were earlier that night on the floor. I asked him when this picture had been taken, and he stated it was probably the night before the school party. He then told me two things that probably would have freaked me out a little bit if I hadn't already thought about this in my head whilst he was telling me about this picture. The first thing was that the anniversary of the deaths was tomorrow. And the second thing that he asked me is if the rolls had fallen down before. I told him that the first one had fallen about a week ago. He then told me that it took her a week to make that dress. He then started to tell me stories about their family and things they used to do, and we ended up talking for almost 6 hours. I think he liked talking about what happened. There was a few times during the stories he told me that he had some tears in his eyes, which in return made me almost tear up. This man in his 70s. The date on the paper was either from 1976 or 1978. The numbers had kind of run together and faded, so it was kind of hard to read. When I got home, it was 4 a.m, and I saw that we forgot to shut the attic stairs. I started to walk up, but stopped and just shut them. I had no reason to go up there, and nor did I care to. I figured out why the rolls had kept falling, and I was content with that.
You know, man, sometimes we'll have a story on the show and I'll think, oh, I hope it's real.
Yeah.
I hope that that's not just a good story, that's actually something that happened. And this is very much one of those. I mean, not that I want the old man's family to have died tragically, not for that reason.
Yeah. Just quantify that.
Yeah.
What parts of that story you want to be real?
I am Italian. We are known to be bloodthirsty, but that is not the reason.
Yes. But yeah, it's one, I like those types of stories. They're quite heartfelt. And they're usually, it's the stories like that aren't frightening or terrifying or somebody being terrorized by something. They're very subtle. It's very gentle. And I think sometimes that gives them a bit more weight than some stories with all the bells and whistles attached to them. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we've said before, whenever something sounds a little too much like a horror movie, you start thinking, I don't think so. Whereas this one, again, hearing you tell it, I'm like, I don't know. This sounds almost too good to be true, but I don't fucking care. It's a good ghost story. We could all do with a little more hope in our lives. I think it's full of little things, though, isn't it? Like when the old man asked him when the first roll fell over, and therefore that's when it started. So clearly she'd gone back to start making the dress again. And if so, does that mean that happens every year on the run-up to the anniversary? If we start pulling at this thread, it's going to get unpleasant, because I'm like, why would you rent out the room then when that happens? Why would you, just just a heads up, there might be some squirrels around this day. Maybe some people aren't as adventurous as our tenant was there. That could be. Yep, that could very well be. I know I wouldn't go poking around in an attic if I heard shit up there at night, because there is a non-zero chance it is spiders, and I don't need that in my life. Oh, I'd be straight up, to be honest. I know you would. When we went up that haunted spire in the hotel in Rugby, man, you were leading the charge, and I was just behind you, far enough back that if something got you, I would have at least a little time to get away. You had enough time to know that you were made for life on paranormal reality shows.
Knowing my luck, something that actually happened.
My co-host was taken and I couldn't help.
And I would milk the shit out of that. I'd have a book tour. I'd have a podcast. I'd have 3 podcasts. He was
carried away by a snallygaster.
Yep, exactly. Yep, I
up
would.
A chimney.
You'd see me doing those kind of weird slap secret handshake things with Baggins. I would just sell out completely at that point. Me and him be hitting the clubs in Vegas. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad it didn't happen for a lot of reasons.
It's a peek into the alternate reality that may have occurred.
Yeah. I don't have a soul, but I also don't worry about paying next month's rent. All right, so before we move on, while I dream about the alternate version of myself who can afford to just buy another bottle of nice mezcal.
Yeah, when you're BFFs with Baggins.
Man, when you say it like that,
Baggins BFF. Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm going to pretend we're both talking about Bilbo Baggins. I'll feel a lot better. Before we move on to the next story, I'm going to share one of the UFO stories from that John Keel collection. This is from a newspaper article, although it does not, I don't know that it specifies exactly where this comes from, but the article says, on July 24th, 1952, a man who was fishing at the Secchio, that's right, you heard it, river near Vico, Italy at night saw a disc hovering nearby for 10 minutes. From it, he said, hung a hose-like object that plunged into the water. All right, calm down. The disc itself measured an estimated 20 meters in diameter, had 5 propeller-like things in the rear, and a dome on top. An orange glow could be seen through slits along the deck. A man wearing a diving helmet looked at the witness through a window, who, before he could get away, received what he described as an electric shock as a ray of light hit him. His strength failed, and it was with difficulty that he looked up to observe the departure of the object in an easterly direction. 6 days later, the witness was again fishing at the same spot when a tall, thin man who spoke Italian with a foreign accent, rather Scandinavian than American, approached him and asked if he had seen airplanes or flying saucers from this particular spot. The witness said no. The man offered him a long, golden-tipped cigarette. The witness began smoking it and thought he was about to die as his head reeled. The stranger took the cigarette away and threw it into the river, leaving the witness weak and helpless. You will find this report in the September 25th, 1952 issue of La Nazione, a Florentine newspaper. That is signed Jacques.
Never heard of him.
Yes, Jacques Vallée. Who? Yeah, never heard of the guy.
One of my favourite ever European UFO sightings is from Italy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's actually the 70th anniversary this year.
Do you mind telling us about it before we move on to the Poveglia segment?
Absolutely. It occurred in front of a crowd of over 10,000 people in 1954 in Florence during a game of football between Fiorentina, who are the famous Italian side based in Florence, and their rivals, I think it's Padova, I think they were playing. And this was in October. Now, this sighting has been explained away as people seeing spiders blooming, if you know what spider blooming is.
No, I'm upset by this on a lot of levels. No, tell me about this.
Yeah, so a spider blooming is when the spiders eject a strand of silk to catch the wind, and basically the wind takes them, which is how spiders spread.
Right, yeah. Sure. Okay, so I know about this.
Yeah.
To my great
That's
despair.
what it was explained away about. So skeptics have looked at this and said that people misinterpreted millions of spiders in October, I know, flying above the city of Florence while a game of football was on. But there's a problem here, Brennan.
Just one?
Because there was a photo taken of the object, which unfortunately has been lost. Oh. You can still see the picture because it was on the front of every national newspaper in Italy the day after. So the picture existed, but then disappeared after this. So it has been published. Basically, the witnesses described what seemed to be a pulsating, glowing egg shape that hovered over the football ground for several minutes, to the point that everybody stopped what they were doing. They were playing football at the time, so the game stopped. All the players were looking at it. All the fans were looking at it. Everybody was staring at this strange glowing egg that was flying above the stadium. And as strangely as it arrived, it eventually just disappeared.
Fascinating. I'm reading about this on the BBC, and it says there was a white substance that fell like snow over Florence.
Angel hair, they call it.
Yeah, it says that the lab, led by respected scientist Professor Giovanni Caneri, subjected the material to spectrographic analysis and concluded it contained the elements boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium, and that it was not radioactive. Unfortunately, this did not provide any conclusive answers, and the material was destroyed in the process. Yeah, oh, so there's someone here saying the spiders. They're talking to a skeptic who says that when I looked at this case originally, I thought perhaps it was a fireball. But it became fairly apparent this was actually caused by young spiders spinning webs. Very, very thin webs. What?
This is a prime example of, I don't care about all the witnesses, the photograph, and the scientific analysis proving that this wasn't spider silk. I'm going to tell you what it is. I mean, the arrogance, the absolute arrogance of somebody who could sit there, ignore all the evidence and say, no, this is clearly this. I thought it was a fireball. What, do fireballs hover now, mate? I mean, come on.
Well, not only that, but to go from, well, I thought it was a fireball, but then I decided it was spiders. This is a significant leap.
Yeah, it also proves that he's either not looked at the case and didn't know it was analysed and also hasn't seen the photo, or he's just deluded beyond belief. This is when it becomes a cult, because it doesn't matter what evidence you show to disprove it. I mean, they're not even similar explanations, are they?
Man alive.
It's like we've said before, it's like when anybody tries to dismiss a sighting as ball lightning. There's this perception, because people talk about ball lightning all the time, that they know where it is. They've no idea. Nobody's seen it hardly. You can count the amount of people that have witnessed ball lightning firsthand, officially, as in scientists, on one hand. You can't do it. Thousands of people around the world have had experiences of balls of lightning flying around and chasing it. I was watching something the other day where some woman in Scotland was amusingly telling the story about a man with a wooden leg. Said she never seen him move so fast, even though he only had one leg, when this ball of lightning came flying through a cafe.
I'm not known for my speed, Paul, but I would get out of the way.
So it just shows you, I mean, like you say, how can you go from it being a fireball to going, what this is spiders. Young spiders. What, in October? Really?
And just before we move on, I want to mention that the BBC does bring up the fact that spider silk is made up of completely different elements than those which were identified in the samples brought to the lab. So
No, that must be wrong, surely. Have you not heard of the borium ejecting spider?
Only in my nightmares, Paul. Only in my nightmares. So we're going to take a quick break from the stories to talk about Poveglia. And of course, Poveglia is an island in the Venetian lagoon. As I mentioned at the top, Brian Baker, who is a journalist for, I think, the Superstitious Times. He's had articles in, is it Haunted magazine? The one that,
yes.
Yeah, the one that you were published in. So, yes. And he's a really nice guy. He's interviewed, I think, both of us at this point. And is very, very friendly dude. And he posted this link to a YouTube video. And Brian said, it's nice to see that if this is true about Poveglia, that, we can start kind of correcting some of the misinformation out there. And of course, again, on episode 13, called it The Haunted Island of Dr. Killjoy, because the point of that episode, we're going to do haunted islands. But the more I looked at the three different stories, it was Poveglia, Daxa, which is off the coast of Croatia, and I can't recall the third one off the top of my head. But what I discovered is that all those stories are bullshit. And Poveglia, the thing that kind of made me think this isn't right was that every article I found about it used almost all the same wording. And I realized that it came from an article that, I can't remember his name, Brent something, had written for Mysterious Universe, like
Swanson. Brett Swanson.
Swanson, that's it. Yeah, Brett Swanson. He'd written it for Mysterious Universe like 2013 or something. But I realized that every article was essentially just copying that text and using that was their source. So I actually went looking through Google Italy and found an article by a Venetian journalist named David Bussato. And so I ran it through Translate, because of course I don't speak Italian. And it was really interesting because he basically went through the entire history of Poveglia and broke it down. So just quickly, folks, I'm going to read you the description of the story of Poveglia that I wrote for 100 years ago, and then I'll tell you what actually happened. According to pretty much every English-language article about the Poveglia hauntings you can find on the internet, the first people to live on the island arrived in the 5th century, fleeing from barbarian invasion. When the Black Death began to sweep Europe in the 15th century, Poveglia became a lazaretto, a leper colony, where anyone who showed any sign of plague would be held until their death. According to sources, it's believed almost 160,000 people died on the island. According to the same haunted histories, in 1922 a hospital was built, and Poveglia became an insane asylum. The inmates, madmen sent from all over Italy, were held there in barbaric conditions, tormented by the doctors and the spirits of the dead. Of course, when they tried to tell their doctors about the spirits, it was written off as insanity. Over the years, the head doctor performed hundreds of unnecessary brain surgeries on helpless patients. He believed that if he cut apart the brain just right, he could cure insanity. But then he started to hear the spirits too. Day in and day out, the ghosts of Poveglia started to drive the doctor insane, until finally, in one last attempt to rid himself of them, he threw himself off the top of the hospital. To this day, Poveglia is said to be haunted by thousands of the plague dead, as well as those inmates who were tortured to death, and by their torturer himself. Because the bodies of thousands of plague victims were thrown into pits and burned, it's believed ash from their bodies make up 50% of the island's substrate. Which is a great story. You know, and if you watch, like, our buddy Zach Baggins, he had an episode of Ghost Adventures set on Poveglia. I think the Osborne kid did too. And of course, it's all bullshit. None of it is true. And folks, again, if you've heard our past episodes, you'll know this, but I'm going to assume that most people who are listening now are not familiar with that episode. So this is what really happened. Poveglia was populated in the 6th century, not the 5th. And if I have my history right from that time, they were fleeing the Lombard invasion, and Poveglia was never a lazaretto, not the way that these things describe. So a lazaretto can be a leper colony or a quarantine station for incoming ships. Poveglia was a quarantine station, but not until the 18th century, and it only ever held 2 ships believed to be infected. The lazaretto where people actually died, and there were as many as up to 500 a day, according to an archaeologist named Vincenzo Gobbo. And that was Lazaretto Vecchio, and then later Lazaretto Nuovo. Those are both separate islands. They're both also in the Venetian lagoon. And it was never an insane asylum. That was San Servolo. That's another island in the lagoon. There was a hospital on Poveglia, but it was a convalescent home for the elderly. And there were psychiatric facilities there because obviously dementia comes, is part and parcel of caring for the elderly to a certain degree. But it was never an insane asylum. And if there was a fucking mad doctor, which I'm sure there wasn't, he did not commit suicide. There's no record of this. And so basically what happened with Poveglia, according to journalist David Bussato, is that every story from the Venetian lagoon was sort of mashed together on one island. And that has just been the story everyone's told because everyone loves a good story. And hey, I love a good story as much as anyone, but I don't like false information. And so I think this was a great time to kind of revisit the Poveglia story, just because debunking bullshit is always a good thing.
I think it's one of those as well. It relies on the fact that people hearing the story won't go and check because the sources are going to be in Italian or Latin.
Yeah, and again, that was the case with this. I had to put, again, this is 7 years ago now, but I had to put 2 or 3 different articles into Google Translate and kind of do some separate verification to back all that up. But you're right, it's just easier because there is a group of people in our community who don't care if it's true.
What?
I know. I sorry, I should have prepped you for that one.
You'll be telling me the Winchester House isn't real nice.
I would never say that.
Thank God.
Oh, man. That was close, though. Imagine if it was not true. Imagine if it was just a really talented lady who wanted to experiment with architecture in an era where women weren't allowed to do that professionally. What a crazy story that would be. Oh, man.
Yeah. Imagine her saying that it was, the ghosts of her husband's victims of the Winchester rifle coming back, and ignoring the fact that she had a shooting gallery in the house.
And implying that her only point in life was to be subject to her husband's legacy, because these stories are written by misogynist idiots. Anyways.
Yes. Well, ironically, as we were talking about source material there, all the Winchester stuff comes from a made-up article written by a crap psychic in the 1930s, doesn't it?
I didn't know where it comes from. I just knew it was false.
Yeah, there's an article from mid-1930s after she died, obviously.
Right.
And that's where it all comes from. There was nothing to do with it before that, ever, at all.
Yeah, I've said this before on the show. Well, I haven't said it for a long time, but I used to listen to a show called 99% Invisible, which I'm sure is still around. It was a massively popular show back then. I have to assume it still is, but it was a podcast about design. And they talked about the Winchester house and why it looks the way it does. And yeah, I mean, Sarah Winchester wanted to be an architect, but that was not possible because of the social mores of the time. But she was very wealthy, so she could experiment on her own house and she could do all kinds of shit and just pay crews to constantly be doing stuff so she could try things out. And obviously, like after the, what was that, the big San Francisco earthquake, Paul?
Was it 1906 or 1908?
I want to say 08, but I don't know. But either way, a lot of the property was damaged. So that's why some of the stairways don't go anywhere.
There are articles in the end of the 1900s, before you get into the 1910s, that talk about the Winchester house and the damage that happened to it. You can find them if you can be asked to research them.
Yeah, that's it.
Or you can just listen to dodgy paranormal investigators just making crap up constantly.
There are apparently ghosts there. I know some of our listeners have gone there, and some who are very sensitive to these things, and they've told me it's got nothing to do with Sarah Winchester, but there really is something there. And that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, you've got the one that helps people or looks after them. I remember seeing an interview with a painter, I think it was, who nearly fell off a ladder outside, and he claimed that a ghost had held him on the ladder and saved his life.
Oh, no kidding.
And that's one of those. That came from a documentary about 30 years ago, because I think, once again, the modern version of the Winchester tale is something that has been perpetuated over the last 20 years.
Of course, yeah.
Did the Warrens go there at all?
Oh.
I'm just wondering.
Dirty Ed. So, yeah. Again, just because it all came up at the same time, I thought that this would be a good time to quickly revisit Poveglia and remind you that there's enough real spooky shit happening in this planet, folks. We do not need these nonsense stories. We can let them go. And I will include a link in the show notes to the YouTube video as well that Brian spoke about on his account. Because, hey, sometimes watching shit is better than listening to it. I don't really use YouTube that way myself, but I understand people do, so I will remember to include that. And also, before we move on to the next story, I'd also like to say, watch A Haunting in Venice with Kenneth Branagh as Hercule Poirot. It's actually pretty good. I felt bad for it because Death on the Nile was such a pile of shit. Everyone kind of ignored Haunting in Venice, but Haunting in Venice is so much better. Smoke gets in your eyes. This was originally shared as White Smoke on the 2019 episode Terror of the Deep. I guess I should start by saying that strange things have happened to me frequently ever since I was a child, but I always shrugged them off as coincidences or ignored them for the sake of my sanity. One incident, however, stands out among many because it was different from anything I'd ever experienced before. It happened when I was 15 years old and is one of the most vivid experiences I've ever had. My sophomore year of high school, I was very excited come the end of March because I was participating in an annual trip my school does called the European Trip. Well, they really dug deep for that one. On these trips, anywhere from 40 to 50 students are taken for a little over a week to tour a country in Europe. That year, the trip was to Greece and Italy. We spent 4 days in Greece and then took an overnight ferry to Italy, where we stayed for another 5 days. The ferry was a good size, very modern inside and brightly lit. The only times it actually occurred to me that I was even on a boat was when my roommates and I went looking for our room, and the narrow hallways would bob with the waves. The rooms were divided with 4 girls in each room, and they were very small. There was a tiny bathroom with only a stand-up shower, a toilet, and a sink. Directly across from the bathroom was one closet. There were 2 sets of bunk beds which were placed across from each other, and a table between them. The room did not have any windows, which made it feel even more suffocating than it already was. When it came time to sleep, I took the bottom bunk on the left side of the room, and as soon as the lights went out, the entire room was pitch black. It was so dark. I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. That was a little unsettling, admittedly, as it made me feel vulnerable in the dark since I could not see anything. I should mention that during the stay on the ferry, I did not feel spooked out or nervous or uneasy at all, as usually happens before something supernatural occurs. After sleeping for maybe a few hours, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. I wasn't jolted awake, and I didn't actually hear anything. I just snapped my eyes open for whatever reason. When I opened my eyes, all I could see was darkness, and what looked to me like white smoke right in my face. The smoke was the only thing I could actually make out in the darkness, and as I looked down my body where I lay, I saw it was hovering above the length of me. almost touching me. My first thought when I saw the smoke was, oh God, I'm blind. Like I literally could not see anything but blackness and white wispy smoke that was slightly moving. I immediately turned around in the bed and turned on the light, but when I turned back, the smoke was gone. It was extremely confusing to me because if I'd actually seen smoke, it should have been clearer in the light, but nothing was there. I looked up at my roommates, but they all seemed to be asleep. So I shut off the light, looked down in my bed again, nothing was there, and just went back to sleep. I didn't mention what happened to any of them, and I still haven't. I'm not sure what it could have been, as I'm not too familiar with smoky apparitions or whatever you'd call it. To this day, I have still not encountered anything else similar to that. And yeah, that's just a weird little story. I guess not technically an Italy story. It happened on the way to Italy. But having been on a ferry boat going to Italy, Paul, I can confirm it is an otherworldly experience.
Yes, I've never caught a ferry in that. I've only sailed in the Mediterranean around Kefalonia. So that's when I decided, obviously, I could live as a pirate, clearly.
I guarantee you that was a vastly preferable experience.
I have sea legs. I discovered that.
I had sea legs, but that's about all I had on that boat. It was a 3-day boat from Tangier, Morocco to Genoa, Italy. And I don't ever recommend you do that. It was with the ferry company Grandi Navi Veloci. And they do this thing where when you go on board, there's this real good-looking gal with long black hair and a little sailor outfit. And I assume, this was news to me. I've never seen this before. I lived on an island. I was never invited to take a photo with a beautiful woman in a sailor's costume. But on this boat I was. And I could not think of anything worse because my cousin and I had been sick in Morocco. We were pretty miserable. But somewhere out there is a photo of us standing haggard next to this beautiful woman who clearly can tell that we smell like death warmed over and is just straining her smile as much as possible while holding a life preserver in front of us. It was terrible.
I've heard a rumour that experience for that female sailor is the inspiration for the film Smile. I'm not sure how true that is. I read it on the Ghost Adventurers site.
I mean, they would never tell us. They would never lie to us.
Good. Thank God for that. Some things you can rely on.
Funny enough, actually, last night I went to go see Quiet Place, day one.
Right, yeah.
It's really great. Although I will say it's less a horror movie than it is a really kind of deeply sad meditation on the acceptance of death. It was directed by Michael Sarnowski, who made Pig, which, if you haven't seen it, is one of the best things Nicolas Cage has done in about 15 years. Really, again, another very, very deeply sad film. And I mean, A Quiet Place Day One it's got some good action or some horror set pieces in it, but there were times where it reminds me a little bit of me when I'm writing a story for this other thing where I'm like, I actually kind of got some characters I'm having fun with here. I don't really want to have to do all the horror shit. But you got to do the horror shit because the horror shit is why everyone's here. And there's parts of Quiet Place Day One that sort of felt like that. But anyways, the whole point, there was a trailer for Smile 2. And I didn't love the first Smile, but Smile 2 actually looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's about pop star.
It is, yeah.
Isn't it? See, I do read what young people are sharing on the internet sometimes.
On the TikToks.
Yeah, you mean you watch.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, going back to the experience, I would be very surprised if there weren't some kind of ghosts floating around in the Adriatic between Italy and Greece. Because obviously there's been quite a few skirmishes over the years in that particular area, especially during World War I and World War II. Especially in World War II, you had the strange situation of Italy invading everywhere around there. And then obviously when Italy collapsed, the Germans invaded it. So then we then had to go in and start evacuating all the Italians to stop them being executed by the Nazis, even though 3 years before we were stopping them trying to kill everybody in the Mediterranean. I think most of them made their way to Dalmatia, which is where Dalmatian dogs come from. And then the Germans came for that, and we just had to evacuate them into Egypt from there and just wait for a bit till the backup came behind them, because obviously they were unaware what was happening in France. And didn't realise that they'd be wanting to get out of Italy a lot quicker than they invaded it.
Just before we move on, I wanted to share another UFO story from that John Keel newsletter from Italy. Although, weirdly, this actually ties into, and I'm sure you're aware of this, there's a little bit of an overlap with your situation here in this moment. So I will share this. In that strange summer of 1954, thousands of people reported unidentified flying objects in the skies over Rome, Italy. One of the witnesses was Mrs. Claire Booth Luce, then U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, and she, like hundreds of other people in Rome, was stricken with an odd malady which sapped her vitality and reduced her to a thin, pale shadow of her former self. Eventually, her bewildered doctors decided she was suffering from lead poisoning, brought about by the lead content in the paint on the walls of her Rome apartment. Now, this next paragraph is interesting, and this is the part that relates to you. Hundreds of people around the little town of Barrie, Ontario, were laid low by, quote, lead poisoning 3 years later during a massive UFO flap there in 1957. They became weak, nauseous, mentally confused, and their doctors were unable to alleviate their illness. The odd ailments lasted for about 2 weeks. And then in July 1967, the tap water in Civitavecchia, we're going to go with that, Italy, also turned a bright green, and authorities shut down the town's plumbing while they searched for the cause. If they found it, it was never revealed. And of course, you're house sitting for your mom right now, and she is over nearish to Barrie, Ontario. And I thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, that's where my cousin and her husband emigrated to over 30 years ago. That's where they made their base in Canada, in and around Barrie.
What did they know?
Who knows what secrets they hold?
Telling you. Are you familiar with those poisonings, those UFO poisonings?
Yeah. There's a few. I mean, there's obviously, if you dive into it and look into some cases, there's a lot of reports of things like conjunctivitis in a lot of cases, especially ironically regarding Keel. There was a lot of witnesses to Mothman that suffered from conjunctivitis. There's been numerous UFO sightings, especially in the 70s in the States, where people suffered really bad health issues that were akin to radiation poisoning. Obviously, the Cash Landrum case is a prime example. Another one dismissed as hysterical women misidentifying a helicopter. I'm not sure helicopters fire heat beams at people, but maybe that's just that particular part of
awesome
the state.
Helicopters do.
Sounds like hell.
Now we're talking.
And so a lot of clear report. When you have a really diligent reporter who's able to speak to people properly, you find more sort of health-related issues to witnesses than just the standard PTSD, because obviously one of these strange aspects of any kind of weird phenomena, I think, is the ability to be able to share it without ridicule. And I think especially when it comes to things like UFO sightings or abductions or experiences or connecting and communicating with alleged extraterrestrials, the ramifications of that are not only the ridicule that the witness may have, but also their internal PTSD, because they can't speak to somebody. They can't talk about it, because as soon as they start talking about it, they're laughed at, or they're, the old, are you on your medication? Perhaps you should stop taking your medication. What are you smoking? What are you drinking? You're under a lot of stress. Isn't it just... I mean, there was a brilliant UFO report this week from Canada, where someone in the area, the news reporters asked them about it, and clearly they either didn't know or they've got a sense of humour, because somebody said, well, I heard it was explained as Venus reflecting off a weather balloon as it was hovering over some swamp gas. That's
a lot of very bad explanations combined into one mega terrible explanation. That's like the singularity of bullshit explanations.
It's a pun. I'm trying to think what show. It's actually a line from a show.
Oh.
I can't remember if it was the X-Files, but somebody tried to explain a UFO sighting away by saying, yes, it was a weather balloon reflecting Venus as it hovered over marsh gas. That's what they saw. They didn't see a UFO. And everybody kind of goes, oh, yeah. But yeah, so whoever they interviewed was either very well versed in it, or the journalist writing it had a deep sense of humour and was clearly, because somebody said, oh, it's a drone, even though these people have clearly described two massive balls of light circling each other. Do drones have spotlights now?
Well, I mean, I've seen some cool drone shows, so I guess it's not impossible, but yeah.
I've never seen one projecting a massive ball of light around it, though.
This is true. And again, I don't, because these things have been happening long before there were aerial drone shows to distract us from the drudgery of our lives, I don't think we can write everything off to that. Although, again, the temptation for journalists to do that will be strong.
Maybe on local papers, but I think these days the major news outlets are a little bit more open-minded, I think, due to what's going on over the last few years, thank God.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Speaking of Canadian reports, just before we move on to the next story, I found this a little while ago, and I keep meaning to share it, and so I just remembered while you were talking about that. This falls along more the ghost side of things, but this was reported by the Revelstoke Review, and of course, Revelstoke, my hometown. The headline is, Theatre Ghosts Approve Vernon Cinema Renovations. So Vernon is a town about 2 and a bit hours west of Revelstoke. And, when we want to go see a movie, you go to Salmon Arm or you go to Vernon, because Revelstoke only ever had the one theater. It would have movies for 2 weeks at a time. So once you saw it, you saw it. If you wanted to see anything new, you had to drive. So Vernon was where I would go. I remember seeing Munich at the Vernon Town Cinema with my cousin Mike back in, 2005. I'm old, guys. But anyways, so the Vernon Town Cinema is famously haunted. I don't know much about the stories, but this has kind of been part of its lore for a very long time. And I thought I would just share this article. The ghosts in the glorious historic downtown Vernon Theatre have given their approval to renovations made inside the Old Girl. No chocolate bars, well, actually a specific brand of bar, have been thrown out of their concession stall as 7 weeks of revamping the town theatre on 30th Avenue draw to a close. The ghosts don't seem to be angry. They appreciate the upgrades, smiled Robin Thurston, executive director of the town after managing director of the Okanagan Screen Arts Society. Scott John shared a story of being alone in his office at the theater one night, and a chocolate bar went flying onto the floor. The ghosts know we love the space as much as they do. Besides the concession, the women's washroom, an upstairs storage space, and the projection booth are said to be well visited by apparitions. None of these spaces, however, were touched during the recent 7-week theater closure, which saw the auditorium completely revamped and cleaned. Walls were taken down, new sound baffling was put up. A new curtain is hoped to be in place by opening night, Thursday, May 16th. The auditorium has been repainted. There's a new system for live acts and for the cinema side of the town, which opened as a dance hall in 1929 and was converted to a theater in 1938. And that basically, the rest of it goes on. You guys don't need to hear about all the renovations. But I thought that was kind of fun. Normally we hear about ghosts getting all pissed off during renovations, but these ones don't mind so much.
Absolutely. Maybe they are thinking it could do with a bit of an update, and therefore are quite appreciative of the efforts being put in to do so.
That's the kind of haunting I can get behind. All right, we are going to take a quick break to pay the bills, and we'll be right back with our next story.
Notre Dame. This was not your average ghost town, as while it was happening, I did not know that I was indeed talking to and taunting what turned out to be the proof of the afterlife. This is indeed a true story, and I will swear by it by all the souls that I have loved that have passed before me. This happened over 25 years ago, when I was a student at a prep school in Rome, whilst my father was working with NATO. I can remember every detail as clearly as it happened yesterday, which I'm grateful for, as it gave me the realization that we are in fact responsible for our actions in this life eventually. I'm not saying I'm a religious person, but I'm now, because of this experience, a spiritual one. The school, Notre Dame International, was in fact a boarding school, and the occurrence happened at 10 p.m. one night and lasted for a full 2 to 3 minutes, as opposed to the usual quick glance of a shadow out of the corner of one's eye. I know the exact time it happened because this was the time of lights out, when we were all supposed to be back into our own rooms and hunkered down for the night. I was already in bed and waiting for my roommate to come back from shooting the breeze with the guys next door to us. The lights in our room were out, as the name of the time at hand implies, but the hallway lights were left on until later for the prefect to conduct his rounds. A few seconds after I turned off the lights to our room and lay in bed, what I thought was my roommate Mike showed up, standing at the door to our room, silhouetted by the lights behind him in the hall. The weird thing was that he just stood there for a full 30 seconds or more, not saying anything or even moving. I just figured he was goofing around as usual, so I told him he'd better get into his bed before the prefect came round and gave us problems. But nothing. No response at all. So I told him again with a little stronger emphasis to get his butt in the room. Still no response, so this time I made the motion to get out of bed to confront him, if he wanted to keep playing these games, and it was at this time that the figure entered the room by walking slowly and came to stop after about 6 feet. Again, after another 30 seconds or so had passed, and I asked Mike what the hell had gotten into him. By this time, this roomie of mine was now only 10 feet away from bed, and just stood there motionless, looking directly in my direction, and still clearly defined by the lights of the hallway behind them. By this time, I was getting annoyed with this game, so I got out of bed, and as I did so, this figure, which I thought to be my friend, turned and walked behind one of our large clothes wardrobes, and was no longer in sight. Thinking I was about to be ambushed by Mikey, I slinked along the far side of the wall with a pillow in hand, ready to beat the crap out of him for making me play this stupid game. Eventually, I made it to the light switch and flipped it on, expecting a full frontal attack of some sort, but nothing happened, because there was nobody there. After checking in the wardrobe, obviously, and still finding no one, I was actually confused, if anything, until it dawned on me what had just occurred. Whilst I was sitting on my bed, literally scratching my head to try and comprehend the magnitude of what I'd just experienced, Mike walked into the room and told me to turn the lights off quick before the prefect made his rounds. Those kinds of schools have a very poor reputation, shall we say.
Oh, really?
Boarding schools in general, there tends to be, as you North Americans call hazing. We tend to call it psychological torture in this country, masquerading as bullying. So it would be interesting to know what the history was, because I would presume that there would have been a few students over the years that had a hell of a time whilst being dumped in such a boarding school as their hard-working international parents, because usually those kind of schools have a very rich student base from all corners of the world, and sadly sometimes people won't get on for no other reason than not being from the same country, which is always a stupid thing. But so it would be interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if such an establishment as that had some kind of haunted history that would be willing to play games. But it seems a good-natured one once again. They seem quite pleasant, these Italian ghosts, don't they?
Well, being dead takes the wind out of your sails a little bit.
It takes the edge off personality.
That's it, yeah. On the subject of the boarding school thing, I actually just listened to a podcast about Lord Aspinall, and they talked about the system of hazing in British boarding schools, at the very least, and the guest on the show had kind of gone through it, and that sounds like hell on earth. Just being abused by your classmates, sometimes brutally, and no one cares.
That's a rite of passage, all that kind of crap.
Yeah, I can't imagine why things are so fucked up now, because we just, continually abuse the previous generation. That's totally cool and normal.
Yeah. Like them people who share social media posts about how it was much better in the old days when kids got battered by their parents. Yeah, of course it was. That was miles better. Absolutely. Yeah. Of course it is. Yeah, that didn't do any damage to anybody, did it? No.
Nope. Everything's going fine if you hadn't noticed.
It's a bit like saying, I wish we still had lead in us food. You know what I mean? It's just like, shut up. You idiot.
Well, I'm happy you said that, because before we move on to the next story, I feel it is really, this is a social, a public service announcement. Generation X, stop posting shit about how you're the last tough generation because you drank from hoses or some shit. It is embarrassing. 10 years ago, you were making fun of the boomers for doing this shit. Now, because you feel the cold breath of mortality on the back of your neck, which I understand, I feel it too. Now you have defaulted to this nonsense position that you are somehow outlaws and renegades. Nope, you were just badly parented. That's all. You're not tough. None of us are tough. You were abandoned as children. That sucks. You probably got hit. It did not make you better people. I know a lot of you. It didn't make you better people. God damn.
And let's not forget that a lot of the rules that are in place these days in regards to health and safety are because children died.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As I've mentioned before, one of my friends, as a child growing up, died whilst playing on an abandoned train line with coal wagons when he was 10. And,
Good God.
That was the kind of thing, we joke about Donald Pleasance turning up as the dark spirit, terrifying. And it happens every time we have a heat wave in this country, young people will swim in bodies of water that they either can't swim in or they completely misunderstand or presume that it's safe or there's nothing underneath it. You know, we're not talking like one or two. This is not Lake Lanier levels of passing, but we still have a good dozen or two every year of young people that have jumped into quarries or gone swimming in reservoirs. And you just think, it's even in this day and age, it still happens. So it must have gone on much more in the past, you know, and old days where people round here, people be playing around old pits, going in, climbing up slurry heaps. You know, it's like that. Oh, it was much better when nobody had to wear a seatbelt in cars. What? Why? Why was it better?
I mean, being able to catch someone else's head in your lap was really cool. I mean, it was what real men do. Our last story tonight will be Milan. This is a story I always tell people when asked if I ever had a paranormal experience. I will tell you the first part, about how it started, with my mom. First, I need to clarify, my mom is sensitive. She does not see or hear spirits. It is more of a feeling thing. She always knows when something is about to happen or if something's wrong. Since she was raised Catholic, the priests and nuns always told her there was no such thing as ghosts, and she was just imagining things. In the late 70s, she was living in Milan, Italy with my dad, in a house that was built around 1700 and was used as a shelter for the wounded during both World Wars. Well, that has to be enough of an explanation for everything that happened there. It all started with feelings of being watched. She was never alone in a room, even when she was alone in a room. She would feel touched, an overflow of thoughts in her mind that didn't seem like her own. After a while, my dad started showing signs of depression. He would stay home, catatonic, instead of showing up at work. He would be desperate, feeling empty and lost, although he was living what was supposed to be a happy life with a woman he loved. After my dad started getting unusually irritated and withdrawn, my mom took shelter in prayer. She would stay home and pray, trying to restore peace. That is when it started escalating. Every night their shoes would be moved from where they were left. Shoelaces would be nowhere to be found and would turn up in the most unlikely places. They were even found hanging from a chandelier once. The house had a shower, which is an unusual addition in very old Italian buildings. It was old and rusty, so they needed to use a wrench every time they wanted to shower. The spirits of the house, however, didn't need any help and would start the water every night. My mom would wake up scared to death but praying silently while walking to the bathroom with her tools to stop the heavy flow of water. When she started getting used to it, the spirits turned it up a notch. My parents had a red chaise sofa in their living room that came with the house. When Mom would walk to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, there would be long strains of white hair all over the red cushions. She would clean it up daily. Most certainly they would be back every morning. I have to add, my dad is bald, and my mom has black hair. By then, Dad would hardly leave the house, and much less talk, not to mention he still denies and changes the subject when we imply anything different was taking place. After a few weeks, Mom had had enough. She confronted the spirits by saying they would stop harming my father and her, and that either they would leave the house for good, or she would make them leave. That same morning, my mom was in a car accident. Her boss was driving, and she suddenly lost control and hit a parked truck. Although all the other people in the car left the scene without a scratch, my mom's legs were shattered in several places, and she needed immediate surgery, but the hospital my father had worked in was unable to provide her with proper care. He then made arrangements for surgery back in Brazil where he used to work, and they flew back home the same night. Since the confrontation, my mom has never again been able to set foot in that house. And Paul, I think that's really interesting because usually when we talk about people kind of owning their space, it's always, as we've said before, it's always this sense of like, all you have to do is say, get on out of here, and they just go. And in this case, it really seems that's some Old Testament vengeance.
Well, why should they go? They were there first. You should go.
I mean, I don't disagree, but I think there has to be a better way to express your displeasure than a car accident. I mean, it is a very Italian response. It is proportionate to the degree that all Italian responses are proportionate. That is the football player falling down when someone breathes on him of ghost vengeance. But
or the basketball player flopping. There seems to be an epidemic of NBA players who fall to the ground with very little contact.
Yet another crime we can trace to the Italians.
Well, yeah, I mean, ghosts and cars are a strange thing. It always reminds me of the gentleman in the 1990s who claimed he had a Ford Capri that was possessed.
Really? What was the story there?
and his car was possessed and he thought it was trying to kill him. I think he used to eat his cassette tapes as well.
Oh, so things were going well for him.
Might have just been a really crap cassette player in a Ford Capri.
I misheard. I thought you said he would eat cassette tapes, and I thought the car is the least of his problems. I misunderstood.
You've been reading The Lawnmower Man again?
Yeah, I fell asleep while reading Christine and watching The Lawnmower Man.
That's a mashup.
Man, so what, aside from eating his cassette tapes, what would the car do that made him think it was haunted?
He basically said it was trying to kill him. Every time he would drive, brakes kept failing, and then he'd have an MOT and they'd say everything was fine. It just had loads of problems, and when he had them checked, they always kept telling him everything was fine. And so he became convinced that this car was trying to kill him. It's a while since I've seen an article about it, so I am reaching back into my mind from about 25 years ago. But yeah, and I'm sure his number plate had 666 on it. I will have to do some reinvestigation and I will update us next week when I've checked it out, because I have got a copy of the video interview with him, but it's at home.
Okay. I mean, I am very curious because, I mean, I had a similar experience, but it was just a Pontiac Tempest, so it was a piece of shit. I mean, it was trying to kill me, but it would have tried to kill anyone in the driver's seat.
Well, maybe that was possessed.
No self-respecting ghost would be caught dead in a 1988 Pontiac Tempest. I did not want to be in a 1988 Pontiac Tempest. I guess I should say it wasn't my car. It was my girlfriend's car. Good God, what a piece of crap.
What about the car?
Hi-oh. I try to be even-handed in regards to my ex-girlfriend because I was no picnic back then either. And none of them have moved to Dubai, Mr. Bestel, so wink. Yeah, no comment. That's what I thought. So before we head out, I have one more UFO encounter from that Keel newsletter. And this one reads, on one occasion at least, it appears that a UFO pilot may have been photographed. On July, it says 51st, I don't think that's right. On July 21st, 1952, a 50-year-old Italian engineer, Gianpietro Monguzzi, and his wife were mountain climbing in northern Italy. They were struggling up the Churchian Glacier, or Church, I don't know how that's pronounced, in the Bernina Mountains. It was about 9:50 a.m., Monguzzi explained, shortly after the incident, when we saw this red circular machine with a transparent dome on top swoop low and land 75 or 100 feet away. I wanted to move closer to it, but my wife became frightened and begged me to stay with her. Laying in the snow, Monguzzi says he unlimbered the camera he was carrying, a Kodak Retina 1. It was loaded with fast black and white film and was equipped with a Schneider f85 lens. A lot of nerdy picture bullshit I'm not going to bother with. So he snaps a picture of what appears to be a normal-sized being walk out of a UFO and appear to have a long flashlight with a glowing sphere on the end of it. They were dressed in a spacesuit, wearing either coveralls or some type of helmet, a pack of some kind on its back, topped off with visored helmets and possibly heavy-weighted shoes. They also mentioned transparent goldfish bowls. And I think it's kind of interesting that both Italian UFO stories we've read on the show involve some kind of like diving helmet type apparatus.
Well, this is the thing. I think often people just presume that encounters with aliens, they're always either Greys or Nordics. And I think, especially when you look at the 50s, 60s and 70s, people were encountering all kinds of weirdly dressed things. So there are some brilliant stories from Europe. I know Jacques Vallée has covered a few. He was a lavender farmer in France, and he was convinced that he'd stumbled across two people stealing it. And when he got there, it was actually two little aliens who were playing with his lavender. And he couldn't get his head around it at all. He just thought, what the hell is going on here? This is a very strange one. There was another one, it might be the same one where they landed and there was a train track adjacent to it. When the police turned to investigate, they could see the indentation in the track where the saucer had been landed. I think that was one of those two cases was the one that hooked Jacques Vallée as a young boy in France. And that's what made him a ufologist, one of those two cases. But there's tons of crazy stories from across Europe. They're brilliant, some of them.
I mean, Italy is allegedly the fashion capital of the world. I suppose it should be only fitting that its UFO contactees are also spiffily attired.
I would be very disappointed if they weren't sartorially elegant extraterrestrials that visited the streets of Milano.
I believe it. I tell you, I never felt poorer or more shabby than when I was walking around Milan, my friend.
Milan does that to everybody unless you're a supermodel, mate. It's one of those places where you just got to breathe in all the time.
I can't hold my breath that long. All right, that has been our look at some of the hauntings of Italy. We hope you folks have enjoyed it. If there's any stories you have of strange goings-on in Italy, or if stories you have found of strange goings-on in Italy, send us a message, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. We will share them on an upcoming episode of Talk Spooky, or if we have enough of them, we'll do a second Italy episode. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123, or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you, and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lord podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Brody Daniels, our new story intern, who helped us find the stories for this episode. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community. She is also co-host of the Streaming into Madness podcast with Walter Whitaker. Joseph Camo, who helps manage our YouTube account. He's also host of the Sociology Professor YouTube channel. Adam Lynch, who edits our video. He's also host of the Weekly Creep podcast. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community.
Our paranormal pasta chef is Mr. Brennan Storr.
Hey. And my friend and a co-host, Mr. Apollo Bastel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, a host of Mr. Is a Monster. I'll stop. Jesus, that annoys me. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't do that during the episode. Yeah, he's a paranormal Johnny Carson himself. Paul Bestel, host of Mysteries and Monsters. You know him, you love him. He is here. Paul, what is coming up on M&M?
I am diving into the world of the Welsh ferry with my marvellous guest, Mara Starling, on this week's show, and we dive into all kinds of wonderful legends and lore. From the Welsh mountains to the bays of Cardiff, we delve into some of its rich lore and also discover several things we weren't aware of in regards to how cheeky those fays can be in the Welshlands.
Very cool. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media sites and podcast platforms.
Fabulous. I'm Largely the Truth on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. You can find my horror movie show, Weird Together, where Dr. Joseph Camo and I talk about the sociology behind the latest and greatest in independent horror films everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top of the show, we can only do this thanks to the grace of our patrons, Apple Podcast, and YouTube subscribers. So thank every single one of you. You guys are the best. If you sign up at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, that's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or via Ghost Story Guys Premium on Apple or YouTube, you get access to not only early release ad-free versions of the episodes, but you get bonus conversations between me and Paul. I just posted one where Paul expresses deep hatred for a movie, which I always love to hear. It's always very funny. And then he is absolutely slayed by the existence of the Stalked by My Doctor franchise. Those are bonus conversations from episode 189. You also get host adventures, bonus paranormal articles, our monthly live stream, and all kinds of other cool stuff. And you also get to hang out with a really cool community of people. We've got some awesome folks over on our Patreon. And while YouTube is still growing, we are very grateful for the folks who joined early. You can get all of that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Again, that's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or by signing up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts or YouTube. If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have all kinds of cool stuff, t-shirts, stickers, mugs. My favorite design, the inimitable Paul Bestel, where Paul looks like Thor, which is possibly the greatest thing I've ever done with money in my life. And again, you can find that at ghoststoryguys.com. Shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and composer Harper Smith. You can find more of Harper's work by heading to rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts wherever you get your tunes. We also have 2 volumes of soundtrack music created by Harper. All the music you hear on these shows are collected in those volumes, and again, you can stream those on Spotify, Apple Music, and everywhere else. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music. And I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then,
Into the darkness we go.
isn't it?
I'm taking that out of the show, but it's fucking funny.
If you're ever feeling bad about the way you look, Brennan, you should always remember that when he released No Jacket Required, he was younger than you are.
Really?
He was 38 when he released No Jacket Required.
Wow.
So things have improved for men of middle age in 40 years.
Thank God for that. Now that I've killed
a dog drink as loud as that in my life.
I was going to say that's some loud fucking shit.
That's Teddy, that.
Oh.
It's like he's eating it. He's like,
I get it. I think I'm part dog. You nodded a little too quickly there. I don't. That's not good.
I was actually nodding along with the sound of Teddy's water chewing.
Yeah, wink.
Oh, they've got the countdown now on the telly. Polls closing 56 minutes and 12 seconds. Get in there. Yeah, we balanced it up, and some people realised that it's actually better to beat up fascists than be one.
Now you're talking.
Yes, I can't actually remember a time before I started aching. It's a very, very long... I don't know. I must be 10 or 11, because I had growing pains in shin splints and bad knees, and after that, and then numerous broken limbs and bits.
God had to put a throttle on you, Paul, otherwise you would have taken over the world.
There's not many bits of me left I haven't broken, but I'd like to keep the bits that I haven't broken unbroken for the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
I'm just picturing a whole ship of Theseus debate, but, the Paul.
Is my nose really my nose if I broke it 8 times?
That's it, yeah. These are the heady philosophical questions you come to go. Anyways, he's dancing.
He's literally he literally got up, walked all the way across to me, looked at me, turned around, walked.
He's like, shut up, man, I'm trying to sleep here.
Now he's just gone to lay in the hold, which is fine because there's a fucking carpet in there. Come and lie down, you daft bugger. Hello, all right, yes. Well, sit down then. Sit. Okay, right.
Okay, go for it.
No.
Oh. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, no. Skies have opened here.
Oh, is it raining?
Of course it is, it's summer.
God's trying to wash the rest of the Tories off you.
It's there. Margaret Thatcher's tears. But they're not coming from the sky, they're spraying up from hell.
I was going to say they have to. It's a fire hydrant.